Wyoming Territory, 1880s, Thunder Creek. The dry season had bitten the creek to a thin thread, and every fence post held a story. The dawn came slowly to Thunder Creek, as if the sun itself was reluctant to witness what the day might bring. Rose McKenna stood in the doorway of the weather-beaten barn, her 18 years weighing on her shoulders like decades. The calico dress that had once been bright now hung faded and torn at the hem, stained with mud and the honest dirt of labor that never seemed to end. Her hands, small but calloused, gripped a fistful of hay as she pushed it toward the family cow, a rangy Holstein with patient brown eyes that seemed to understand the girl's loneliness better than any person could. The morning air carried the sharp scent of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called its lonely song. Rose paused listening and felt the familiar ache settle in her chest. 1 month. It had been exactly 1 month since Grandma Abigail had died. And every morning Rose woke expecting to hear the old woman's voice calling from the house, reminding her to check the gate or feed the chickens. But there was only silence now, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the wind that never seemed to stop blowing across the short grass prairie. The dog, a lean shepherd mix with one ear that flopped sideways and eyes that missed nothing pressed against her leg. She'd named him Wakeful Walt 3 years ago when he'd wandered onto the ranch half-starved and wary, and had stayed because Grandma Abigail had fed him scraps and spoken to him kindly. Now he was Rose's constant shadow, her only companion in the work that stretched from dawn to dusk and sometimes beyond. Rose wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her pale skin. She was tired, bone-tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. Tired of hauling water with a yoke and buckets when the spring ran low. Tired of mending fences with salvaged wire that cut her fingers. Tired of the fear that gnawed at her every night when she lay in the darkness and wondered how long she could hold on to the ranch alone. Just 1 more day, she whispered to herself, the words becoming a mantra. Just hold on for 1 more day. But deep down she knew that one day would stretch into another and another until either she broke or something changed. She refused to break. Grandma Abigail had raised her to be stubborn, to be strong, to never surrender what was theirs. This land, these 60 acres of prairie with their precious spring boxed in cottonwood planks, was McKenna land had been for 3 generations, and Rose would die before she let it go. The thought of dying didn't frighten her as much as it should have. Sometimes in the darkest hours of night, it almost seemed like a relief. She shook her head, banishing the thought, and reached for the water bucket. That's when she heard it, the sound that would change everything. Hoofbeats, heavy and deliberate, drumming up the dirt road that led from the main trail. Rose's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She straightened, shading her eyes against the rising sun, and watched as a rider appeared through the heat shimmer. Even at a distance, she could tell this wasn't anyone from short grass. The way he sat, his horse spine straight, shoulders squared, moving with the kind of fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, marked him as different. As he drew closer, details emerged that made her breath catch. Buckskin clothing worn soft with travel and decorated with intricate beadwork. A bone choker at his throat. A beaded headband holding back long black hair that fell past his shoulders, gleaming like a raven's wing in the morning light. Feathers, 3 of them tied in a small cluster, lifted and dipped in the wind at his temple. His face was angular, strong-featured with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. A Lakota warrior. Rose had seen native men before, passing through on their way to the agency or the reservation lands further north, but never like this. Never alone. Never stopping at her gate. Never looking at her with eyes that seemed to see straight through to the fear and determination she kept locked inside. His horse was a paint white and brown patches gleaming in the early light, and it moved with the same quiet confidence as its rider. He reined in at the gate, and the paint blew dust from its nostrils, stamping once. The warrior's eyes swept the ranch, the leaning barn, and the small two-room house with its shingled roof and crooked chimney, the spring with its cottonwood planks near the fence line, the vegetable patch struggling in the dry soil. Then his gaze settled on Rose, and she felt the weight of it, assessing but somehow not unkind. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of distant rain that would probably never arrive. Wakeful Walt, instead of growling as he usually did at strangers, simply watched his tail moving in a slow, uncertain wag. "Morning," the warrior said finally. His voice was low and measured, carrying the kind of calm that reminded Rose of deep water still on the surface, but with currents running beneath. Rose swallowed, finding her own voice. "Morning." It came out steadier than she'd expected, and she was grateful for that small mercy. The warrior's hand rested easy on his thigh, but Rose noticed the holstered Colt at his hip, the rifle in the saddle scabbard, the knife sheathed at his belt. He was armed like a man expecting trouble, yet his posture suggested no immediate threat. Still, Rose's fingers twitched toward the Sharps rifle she'd left leaning against the barn wall just in case. Before either of them could speak again, another sound reached them, more hoofbeats, these ones faster, angrier, kicking up a wake of powder on the road behind the warrior. Rose's stomach clenched with a familiar dread. She recognized that rhythm, that aggressive approach. The warrior turned in his saddle one smooth motion, and his hand dropped not to the Colt, but low over it, a warning gesture that needed no words. His paint sidestepped, sensing the tension that suddenly crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. A second rider appeared, coming hard, raising dust like smoke signals. Rose's breath caught when she recognized the horse, a big sorrel with a white blaze and mean eyes, before she recognized the man. Kensington Boyle, foreman for Magnus Fitzgerald's Blackwater Falls Cattle Company. The man who'd been circling the ranch like a vulture for weeks, always with some excuse to ride by, always asking questions about the spring, always making it clear that Fitzgerald wanted what was hers. Boyle slowed as he approached, but instead of reining in properly, he circled wide his hand, drifting toward the rifle strapped to his saddle. His gaze flicked between Rose and the warrior, calculation plain on his weathered face. He was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a mustache that drooped past his jaw and eyes the color of old pennies, hard and cold and without mercy. The warrior shifted his weight, and suddenly he was between Rose and Boyle, though he seemed barely to have moved at all. His voice when he spoke was quiet, but carried across the yard with perfect clarity. "Stay by the barn." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the kind of authority that expected obedience. Rose found herself obeying before she'd consciously decided to stepping back toward the barn door. But her eyes stayed on the scene unfolding before her, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Wakeful Walt, instead of following Rose as she'd expected, pressed harder against the warrior's leg, a gesture of trust that stunned her. The dog was wary of everyone had taken months to warm, even to Dr. Yale. But here he was leaning against a stranger, as if they were old friends. Boyle reined in at the gate, perhaps 10 yards out. His sorrel dancing beneath him, hooves churning the dust. "Well now," he said, his voice loud, and carrying the kind of voice meant to fill space and claim ownership of it. "Didn't expect to find company here this morning, especially not your kind." The last 2 words dripped with contempt. The warrior said nothing. His silence was louder than words, a refusal to be baited, and Rose saw Boyle's jaw tighten with frustration. Boyle's hand stayed near his rifle. The air tightened, stretched thin as wire ready to snap. Rose could feel it, the violence, waiting just beneath the surface, and the way one wrong word or movement could send everything spiraling into bloodshed. She'd never been this close to it before, this imminent danger, and her mouth went dry with fear. For a long moment, nothing moved except the wind and the feathers in the warrior's hair, lifting and falling like the breath of the prairie itself. Then Rose did something she hadn't planned, something that came from pure instinct rather than thought. She stepped forward close enough that her fingers brushed the fringe on the warrior's belt, just a touch light enough it might have been accidental, but it steadied her, grounded her in the moment. She needed to feel that she wasn't alone, that there was someone standing between her and the danger represented by Boyle's cold eyes and casual cruelty. The warrior didn't look down, didn't acknowledge the touch, but he shifted just slightly, just enough angling his body, so that Rose stood within the shelter of his stance, protected by his position, between her and the mounted man. It was an instinctive move, protective and sure, and it told Rose more about this stranger than any words could have. Boyle saw it. His mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile, more a baring of teeth. "Real cozy," he said, his voice taking on a mocking edge. "Miss McKenna, you should be more careful about the company you keep. People might get the wrong idea." Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks, anger, not shame. "This is my land, Mr. Boyle. I'll keep whatever company I choose. Your land." Boyle's laugh was short and harsh. "That's what we need to talk about, Miss McKenna. See, there's been some questions raised about your water rights. Questions that need answering." The warrior spoke for the first time since Boyle's arrival, his voice flat and cold as winter stone. "Questions from who? From the man who wants to steal her spring." Boyle's face darkened. "You want to watch your mouth, Indian? You don't know who you're talking to." "I know exactly who I'm talking to," the warrior said. "A man who follows orders. A man who does his boss's dirty work because he lacks the spine to say no. A man who threatens women because he's too much of a coward to face someone who can fight back." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Rose held her breath, certain that Boyle would go for his rifle, certain that blood would be spilled in the dust of her yard. But Boyle, for all his bluster, seemed to recognize something in the warrior's stance, a readiness, a capability that went beyond mere confidence. He was looking at a man who had killed before and would do so again if necessary, without hesitation or remorse. Boyle's hand moved away from his rifle. Instead, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I came here to deliver this, official-like," he said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "From the Cattle Association. Seems there's been a survey error regarding your spring, Miss McKenna. This here document shows the spring's actually on Blackwater Falls land, which means the water belongs to Mr. Fitzgerald." He held out the paper, and after a moment's hesitation, Rose stepped around the warrior and walked to the gate. Her legs felt unsteady, but she kept her chin up, refusing to show weakness. She took the paper from Boyle's outstretched hand, careful not to let their fingers touch. The document was official-looking, complete, with a Cattle Association stamp and a surveyor's signature she couldn't quite read. The map was crude but clear, a boundary line cutting across the spring, placing it just inside what the paper claimed was company property. The date was recent, just 2 weeks prior. Rose's stomach dropped, but she kept her face carefully neutral. "This can't be right." "It's right," Boyle said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "Signed and sealed. Legal as they come. Now, Mr. Fitzgerald's a reasonable man. He's willing to let you stay on rent the water at a fair rate." "Let me see that." The warrior had moved up beside Rose so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. He took the document from her hands and studied it, his dark eyes moving across the paper with surprising speed. His finger traced the boundary line, then moved to the corner notations. After a long moment, he looked up at Boyle. "The angles are wrong," he said flatly. "This fence line doesn't run this way. Never has. The spring's been here long before any fence was put up. This map is a lie." Boyle's face flushed dark red. "And who might you be to say so? Some drifter who just rode in? What gives you the right?" "Someone who reads land." The warrior interrupted his voice, cutting through Boyle's bluster like a blade. "Someone who's seen enough false surveys to know one when I see it. This paper isn't worth the ink used to print it." Rose felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by the reality of her situation. "I have the original deed," she said. "And the water rights certificate. They're inside. I can show you." "I don't need to see them." Boyle said, his voice hardening again. Here's the official survey. Mr. Fitzgerald filed it proper. Your old papers don't mean much against new surveys, Miss McKenna. That's just how it works." "That's not how it works," the warrior said. "That's how powerful men steal from those who can't fight back. There's a difference." For a moment, Rose thought Boyle would actually go for his gun. His hand twitched toward it, his face contorting with rage. But then he seemed to master himself. He glanced at the Colt on the warrior's hip, at the rifle in the scabbard, at the calm readiness in the other man's stance, and apparently decided discretion was the wiser choice. Instead, he laughed a short, ugly bark of sound without any humor in it. "Big words from a trespasser. You even got a right to be here. Or are you just passing through, sticking your nose where it don't belong?" "He's my guest," Rose said quickly, though she had no idea if that was true. "And I have proof for the spring. My grandmother kept all the documents. Everything's legal and recorded." "Old paper," Boyle said dismissively. "Might not hold up in court against new surveys and official association documents. But you're welcome to try if you got the money for lawyers. Do you, Miss McKenna, got money for lawyers?" Rose's silence was answer enough. She had maybe $20 to her name if she counted the coins in the jar under the floorboard. Lawyers cost hundreds. Boyle's smile widened, seeing his advantage. "Didn't think so. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Mr. Fitzgerald will let you stay on, let you rent the water. All you gotta do is sign over the rights, acknowledge the new survey. Simple. And if I don't?" Boyle shrugged a gesture that managed to be both casual and threatening. "Then things get complicated. Cattle get thirsty, they wander. Fences get damaged. Accidents happen." His eyes moved to the barn, to the house, to the spring. "Be a shame if something happened to this place. Real shame. Especially with you out here all alone." The threat was clear, and Rose felt ice settle in her stomach. But before she could respond, the warrior spoke again, his voice so cold it could have frozen water. "She's not alone." 3 words. Simple. Declarative, but loaded with promise and threat in equal measure. Boyle stared at him, then at Rose, then back again. His jaw worked as if chewing something bitter. "We'll see about that," he said finally. He snatched the folded survey from the warrior's hands, crumpled it, and tossed it into the dirt at their feet. "You've got 3 days to think about Mr. Fitzgerald's offer, Miss McKenna. 3 days. After that, well, like I said, accidents happen." He jerked his reins hard, making his sorrel rear slightly, then spurred the animal toward the gate. As he passed, he aimed the horse directly at wakeful Walt, who stood near the fence post. The dog scrambled back, but the horse was already on him. The warrior moved faster than Rose could track. One hand shot out, grabbing Walt by the scruff, positioning himself and the dog so that Boyle's mount shied at the sudden obstacle. The horse reared properly this time, hooves pawing air, and Boyle cursed as he fought to keep his seat. When the sorrel came down, it had pivoted away from the dog, away from the warrior, away from the threat. No harm done. But the message was delivered, and the warrior would not be intimidated, would not step aside, would protect what needed protecting. Boyle's face was purple with rage. He fought his horse under control and pointed a thick finger at the warrior. "You just made a big mistake, Indian. Big mistake. You'll see. You'll both see." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, raising dust that hung in the air like smoke signals. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly into the distance. And finally, there was only the wind again, and the meadowlark's lonely call, and the hammering of Rose's heart. The warrior released Walt, who shook himself, and trotted back to Rose's side tail, wagging as if nothing had happened. Rose sank down onto the porch step, her legs suddenly too weak to hold her. She pressed her hands to her face, feeling them tremble. "Thank you," she said, her voice muffled by her palms. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." "You'd have managed," the warrior said, his voice gentler now. "You're stronger than you know." Rose lowered her hands and looked up at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, respect maybe, or curiosity, or something else entirely. The morning sun was behind him, turning him into a silhouette edged with gold. "I'm Rose," she said. "Rose McKenna. This is my ranch. Was my grandmother's before me." "Hototo," he said. And there was something in the way he said it, a formality, a weight that told her he didn't give his name lightly. "I was passing through to White River. Saw a young woman working cattle like a grown hand, and stopped to see if help was needed. I need all the help I can get." Rose admitted the words coming out before she could stop them. She immediately regretted the confession. It made her sound weak, desperate. But Hototo just nodded, as if she'd said something perfectly reasonable. "Your gate's loose," he said, gesturing to the main gate that hung at an angle from one hinge. "I can mend it, in exchange for water for my horse and maybe a meal if you can spare it." Rose studied him for a long moment. Every instinct Grandma Abigail had taught her screamed caution: don't trust strangers, don't let anyone get too close, don't show weakness. But she also remembered another lesson: judge people by their actions, not their words or appearance. And this man, this Hototo, had stood between her and danger without knowing her, had protected her dog, had called out Boyle's lies without hesitation. "Fair trade," she said finally. "Gate needs work, and I can spare a meal, though it won't be fancy." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Hototo's face. "Fancy's not what I need." He led his paint to the water trough, and Rose watched as the horse drank deep. Hototo's hands moved over the animal with practiced efficiency, checking hooves, running fingers along flanks, speaking softly in a language Rose didn't understand, but that the horse clearly did, ears swiveling to catch the words. Then he moved to the gate, examining the broken hinge, testing the wood. His movements were economical, purposeful, and Rose found herself watching the way his hands worked, strong hands, scarred and calloused, but surprisingly deft. He pulled leather cord from his pack and began repairs, tying knots that held tight and looked oddly familiar. "Grandma tied it like that," Rose said, surprised. "Same knots, same pattern." Hototo glanced up, and this time he did smile, a small thing. Barely there, but genuine. "Good knots last. Your grandmother knew her work." Rose felt something warm unfold in her chest, something she hadn't felt in the long months since Abigail's death. Connection, maybe, or hope, or just the simple comfort of not being alone. She went inside and put together what food she could: cornbread from yesterday, some bacon she fried up, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. When she brought it out to the porch, Hototo had finished the gate and was examining the spring box, his expression thoughtful. "You've got good water here," he said, accepting the plate she handed him. "Clean and cold, worth protecting." That's what Grandma always said. Rose sat beside him on the step, cradling her own coffee. She said this spring was the reason we survived when others didn't. Said it was McKenna water would be for generations. Hototo ate in silence for a moment, then looked at her. Your grandmother, she died recently. Month ago. Rose's throat tightened. Fever, the doctor said. Came on sudden and took her quick. I buried her on the hill over there. She pointed to the low rise overlooking the spring. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but Hototo's tone carried genuine sympathy. Losing family is losing part of yourself. You sound like you know. I do. Hototo's eyes grew distant. I lost my own lands to men like your Mr. Fitzgerald. Different territory, different names, same story. They came with papers and lies, with soldiers and lawyers, and when the dust settled, my people were gone, and the land was theirs. I was a scout for a while, tracking trails, helping the army navigate territories they didn't understand. But I couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't help them take more. So I left. Been wandering since. Rose heard the pain beneath his words, the old wounds that hadn't healed. I'm sorry, she said, echoing his words back to him. Hototo shook his head. The past is done. But maybe... He paused, choosing words carefully. Maybe this time the ending can be different. Maybe this time the land stays with those who love it. Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them away fiercely. She would not cry. Crying was weakness, and she couldn't afford weakness. As if sensing her struggle, wakeful Walt pushed his head onto her lap, and she buried her fingers in his fur, taking comfort from his solid warmth. Hototo finished his meal in companionable silence, then stood and handed her the empty plate. Thank you, he said. Best meal I've had in weeks. You're welcome. Rose stood as well, suddenly reluctant to see him go. You said you were heading to White River. I was. Hototo looked at the ranch, at the leaning barn, and struggling garden at the spring with its precious water. But maybe I'll stay on a day or two. You've got work that needs doing, and I've got time. Rose's heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay practical. I can't pay much. Can't pay anything really except meals and a place to sleep in the barn. That's enough. Hototo met her eyes, and Rose saw determination there, and something else, a recognition perhaps, of kindred spirits or shared battles. Besides, if your Mr. Boyle comes back, you'll need someone watching your back. He'll come back, Rose said with certainty, and he won't come alone next time. Then we'll be ready. Hototo's hand moved to rest on his colt, a gesture that was both reassuring and ominous. 3 days, he said. That gives us 3 days to prepare. Rose nodded, feeling something shift inside her fear, transmuting into resolved despair into determination. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time since Grandma Abigail's death, she had an ally, someone who understood the fight she was facing. 3 days, she repeated. Then we show them McKenna land doesn't surrender. Hototo's smile was fierce. That's the spirit. As the sun climbed higher and the heat of the day began to build, they got to work Rose, feeding livestock, Hototo, examining fences, and making a list of repairs. And for the first time in a month, Rose felt something she'd almost forgotten. She felt hope. By evening, Dr. Franklin Yale arrived in his buckboard, the wagon rattling over the rutted road, raising dust in the golden light of sunset. He was a lean man in his 50s, with gray threading his dark hair and deep lines carved around his eyes from years of squinting at wounds and reading prescriptions by lamplight. His hands were a doctor's hands, steady, strong, capable, and his eyes missed nothing. Those eyes widened slightly, when he saw Hototo sitting on the porch beside Rose, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. Dr. Yale climbed down from the buckboard, his medical bag in one hand, and approached slowly. "Rose," he said carefully, "I heard there was trouble this morning. Boyle rode through town bragging about how he delivered papers about your spring." "He delivered lies." Rose said, her voice hard. "False surveys and threats." Dr. Yale's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of that. Fitzgerald's been buying up every small holding between here and Granite Pass. He wants an empire, and your spring is the key to watering all that land. Without it, his cattle empire collapses." "Then he's going to collapse," Rose said flatly. Dr. Yale looked at Hototo, his expression assessing. "And you are?" Hototo stood extending his hand. "Hototo? Just passing through, but I'm staying on to help Miss McKenna." Dr. Yale shook his hand, and Rose saw the moment of recognition and the doctor understanding that this was no ordinary drifter, but someone with skill and purpose. Franklin Yale, town doctor and old friend of Rose's grandmother. Abigail was a good woman. She deserved better than fever. Something in the way he said it made Rose's stomach tighten. "Doctor, was there something wrong about Grandma's death? Something you didn't tell me?" Dr. Yale hesitated, and in that hesitation, Rose saw her answer. "I had suspicions," he admitted slowly. "The fever came on too sudden, too strong for someone who'd been healthy days before. And there were signs, symptoms that didn't quite fit. But I had no proof, and accusing Fitzgerald of murder without proof would have been suicide." "Murder?" Rose's voice came out as a whisper. "You think he killed her?" "I think it's possible." Dr. Yale's face was grave. "Abigail told me 2 months before she died that Fitzgerald had been pressuring her to sell. She refused. Said McKenna land would stay McKenna land until the sun burned out. A week later, she started feeling poorly. Not sick, just off. Tired. Weak. Then came the fever." Rose felt rage and grief war inside her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" "What could you do with suspicions, child? You had no power, no money, no proof. I thought..." "Doctor," Yale's voice cracked slightly. "I thought if I kept quiet, maybe Fitzgerald would leave you alone, let you keep the ranch in peace. I was wrong. I'm sorry." Hototo spoke up, his voice measured. "If Fitzgerald killed her, there will be evidence. Poison leaves traces. Bodies, letters, witnesses, something always remains. That's why I came tonight." Dr. Yale pulled a leather portfolio from his medical bag. "Your grandmother gave me copies of documents 2 months before she died. She was worried, said she had a bad feeling about Fitzgerald's intentions. Made me promise to keep these safe and give them to you if anything happened to her. I should have given them sooner, but you were afraid." Hototo said not unkindly, "Fear keeps good people silent while evil prospers." Dr. Yale nodded, shame plain on his face. "Yes, I was afraid. But seeing Boyle here this morning, hearing what he threatened, I can't stay silent anymore. Abigail saved my daughter's life 20 years ago, sat up 3 nights straight, nursing her through scarlet fever when I thought I'd lose her. I owe Abigail a debt I can never repay. But helping you..." He looked at Rose. "That's a start." Rose took the portfolio with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were handwritten copies of documents, receipts for spring maintenance, water rights fees, priority claims dating back to the earliest territorial surveys. And underneath, a letter in Abigail's familiar handwriting addressed to Rose. "My dearest girl," it began, and Rose's eyes filled with tears. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're alone. I'm sorry for that. But know this, you are stronger than you believe, braver than you know, and more capable than anyone gives you credit for. The ranch is yours. The spring is yours. Fight for them. Don't let men like Fitzgerald steal what's ours with papers and lies and fear. You are a McKenna Rose. We don't surrender. We don't break. We endure. I love you more than words can say. Be strong. Be brave. Be stubborn as a winter tick, just like I taught you. Grandma. Rose pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face, now unchecked. Hototo stood and moved to her side, his hand coming to rest gently on her shoulder, not constraining, just present, offering silent support. Dr. Yale looked away, giving her the privacy of grief. When Rose finally mastered herself, she wiped her eyes with the hem of her dress and looked at the doctor. Thank you for bringing these. And thank you for caring for Grandma until the end. I wish I could have done more, Dr. Yale said softly. You did what you could. Rose straightened her shoulders. Now we fight back. These documents prove my rights to the spring. We take them to the judge in Granite Pass, show him the truth, and expose Fitzgerald's lies. It's not that simple, Dr. Yale warned. Fitzgerald has the judge in his pocket along with half the county officials. Money talks louder than truth in these parts. Then we make the truth louder, Hototo said. We find evidence of his crimes, document everything, and take it to the U.S. Marshal. Men that powerful always leave trails. We just have to find them. Dr. Yale studied him with new respect. You've done this before. Something like it. Hototo's expression was grim. I've seen land stolen, people driven off, families destroyed, all legal-like with papers and seals. But there are always cracks in the lies. Always someone willing to talk, always documents that don't quite match. We find those cracks and wedge them open. Rose felt new determination surge through her. Then that's what we do. Doctor, can you make copies of these documents? Hide them somewhere Fitzgerald can't reach? I can do better than that. Dr. Yale's eyes gleamed. My younger brother Owen operates the telegraph office at White River. We can send wire copies to the U.S. Marshal, attach testimony, build a case that can't be ignored or bought off. Do it, Rose said. Send everything. Names, dates, documents, everything. Dr. Yale nodded. It'll take time. The Marshal's circuit court is 2 months away. Until then, you'll need to hold this place against Fitzgerald. Can you do that? Rose looked at Hototo, then back at the doctor. We'll hold, whatever it takes. Then I'll do my part. Dr. Yale climbed back into his buckboard. Be careful, Rose. Fitzgerald's a dangerous man, and desperate men do desperate things. Watch your back. I will, Rose promised. As the doctor's wagon rattled away into the gathering darkness, Rose stood with Hototo in the yard, and the weight of everything pressing down on her. She looked at the hill, where Grandma Abigail rested at the spring, reflecting starlight, at the ranch that was hers, to defend or lose. I won't let her down, she said quietly. I won't let him win. You won't, Hototo agreed. We won't. Rose turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time, not just a stranger who'd stopped to help, but an ally, a partner in the fight ahead. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. This isn't your fight. Hototo was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. I told you I lost my own lands. What I didn't say is that I stood and watched it happen, did nothing because I thought the law would protect us, that paper, and rights would matter. They didn't. By the time I realized we had to fight, it was too late. My family was scattered, my home was gone. He looked at her, and she saw old pain in his eyes. Maybe I can't save what I lost, but maybe I can help you save what you love. Maybe that's enough. Rose felt her throat tighten. It's more than enough. It's... She struggled for words. It's everything. Thank you. Hototo nodded and then looked up at the sky where stars were beginning to emerge sharp and bright. Storm's coming. I can smell it on the wind. Not rain trouble. We should be ready. How long do you think we have? Boyle said 3 days, but men like him don't keep their word. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. We prepare for tonight. Rose nodded, feeling fear and determination twist together in her gut. Then let's prepare. They worked into the night, checking ammunition positioning rifles, where they could be reached, quickly filling buckets with water in case of fire, moving the cattle to higher ground where they'd be safer. And through it all, Rose felt Hototo's steady presence, his calm competence, his quiet strength. When they finally stopped to rest, sitting on the porch with coffee and the sounds of the prairie night around them, Rose found herself studying his profile in the starlight. Your family, she said hesitantly. Where are they now? Scattered. Hototo's voice was flat, but she heard the pain underneath. My sister's on the reservation at White River. My brother went north, trying to find land the whites hadn't claimed yet. My parents... He paused. They died the first winter after we lost our home. Too old, too tired, too heartbroken. They just gave up. I'm so sorry, Rose whispered. That's why I wander. Hototo continued. No home to return to. No family to protect. Just miles, an empty sky, and the memory of what was. He looked at her. But here, this place, this fight, maybe it means something. Maybe helping you means their loss wasn't for nothing. Rose reached out without thinking and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and for a long moment they sat in silence, holding on to each other in the darkness. Finally, Hototo spoke again, his voice soft. You should sleep. I'll keep watch. I won't be able to sleep. Try anyway. You'll need your strength. Rose nodded reluctantly and stood. At the door, she paused and looked back. Hototo. Yes. I'm glad you stopped here. I'm glad you stayed. In the starlight, she saw him smile. So am I. Rose went inside, but sleep was a long time coming. When it finally did, she dreamed of fire and blood and a spring running red. She woke in the darkness, heart pounding, and heard Hototo moving outside, steady, patient, keeping watch. She closed her eyes again and tried to believe that morning would bring hope instead of horror. She was wrong. The attack came with the new moon when darkness was deepest and hope was thinnest. Rose woke to a sound she'd never heard before, but recognized instantly wire singing a high keening note that cut through the night like a scream. She bolted upright, reaching for the Sharp's rifle beside her bed, her heart already hammering against her ribs. Outside, the sounds multiplied, hooves, thundering cattle bawling, men's voices, shouting orders she couldn't quite make out. Rose ran to the window and looked out, and her blood turned to ice. The pasture fence was down wire cut, and posts trampled. Through the gap poured cattle, dozens of them, maybe 50 head or more, churning toward the spring with the desperate urgency of animals half mad with thirst. They drank in great gulps, churning the water to muddy froth, trampling through the vegetable patch that Rose had coaxed to life through weeks of careful watering. Carrot tops and bean poles vanished under hooves. The careful rows of lettuce and squash became pulp. Rose grabbed her dress, yanked it on over her night shift, and ran outside, barefoot, the rifle clutched in both hands. Get out, she screamed at the cattle. Get away from there. But cattle driven by thirst don't listen to human voices. They kept drinking, kept trampling, kept destroying everything she'd worked for. A gunshot cracked across the prairie, a warning shot fired high. Rose spun, and saw Hototo running from the barn, his own rifle raised his hair loose and wild around his shoulders. He fired again over the cattle's heads, and the animals spooked, milling in confusion. Some broke away, heading back toward the broken fence, but others just circled unsure where the danger lay. Then another shot answered from beyond the fence, not a warning, a bullet meant to kill. It whined past Hototo's head so close that Rose saw him flinch. He grabbed her arm in a grip like iron and hauled her toward the house. Inside now. The cattle they're destroying. Forget the cattle. Hototo shoved her toward the door. They want you to come out, make yourself a target. Inside. But Rose pulled free, pointing with a shaking hand. Fire. By the barn, a tossed cigarette glowed in the darkness, deliberate, calculated. Even as she watched it caught in the dry grass near the barn door. Flames bloomed small but hungry, licking up the weathered wood with terrifying speed. Blast it. Hototo ran toward the fire, and Rose followed, everything else forgotten. They grabbed grain sacks from inside the barn and beat at the flames, stamping, smothering. Smoke choked the air, thick and acrid, stinging her eyes until tears streamed down her face. The cattle kept milling, panicked by fire and gunshots, their bawling adding to the chaos. Wakeful Walt appeared from nowhere, grabbed a burning bundle in his jaws, and dragged it away from the barn door toward the mud by the spring. He yelped as embers singed his muzzle, but he didn't let go until the bundle was safely away from anything flammable. Rose's arms ached, her lungs burned, but she kept swinging the sack until her shoulders screamed and her vision blurred. Beside her, Hototo worked with grim efficiency, his movements economical despite the smoke and heat. Finally, after what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, then the last flame died, leaving only smoke and the bitter stench of scorched grass and wood. The cattle, having drunk their fill and been spooked by fire and gunfire, began to drift away through the broken fence. Rose could hear them moving into the darkness, their hoofbeats fading, and she wanted to scream with frustration. But Hototo grabbed her shoulder, his grip urgent. Listen. Rose listened. In the distance, she could hear its saddle leather, creaking horses, moving men's voices low and satisfied. Boyle's men retreating now that they'd done their damage. They'd accomplished what they came for: destruction, chaos, a message sent loud and clear. McKenna land could be taken. McKenna water could be denied. McKenna pride could be broken. Hototo stood still, rifle ready, listening until the sounds faded completely. Only then did he lower the weapon. His sleeve was dark with blood where a bullet had creased his arm during the chaos. "You're hit," Rose said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "Grazed." Hototo's jaw was tight, arms fine. "Like hell it is." Rose grabbed his good arm and pulled him toward the house. "Inside. You're bleeding." For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded and followed. In the kitchen, Rose lit a lamp with trembling hands and pushed him into a chair. The wound was a long, shallow furrow from shoulder to elbow, bleeding freely but not spurting. Not arterial. That was something, at least. She fetched watercloth whiskey for washing the wound. Her hands shook as she worked, exhaustion and fear and rage all churning inside her until she thought she might fly apart. But she forced herself to be steady, to be careful, because Hototo had been hurt protecting her ranch, and she owed him more than a sloppy job of wound care. Hototo watched her in the lamplight, his face calm despite what must have been considerable pain. After a moment, he pulled a needle and thread from his belt pouch and threaded it one-handed with the kind of practiced ease that spoke of too many similar injuries. "Hold the lamp steady," he said. "Watch how it's done." Rose held the lamp and watched as he stitched himself, using the small mirror on the wall to guide his hand. His movements were precise, methodical, and she forced herself to pay attention despite her revulsion. When he faltered, the angle awkward, His left hand not quite coordinated enough, she set down the lamp and took the needle from him without asking. "Show me," she said. He did. His hands guided hers for the first stitch, showing her how to pinch the wound closed, how to angle the needle, how to pull the thread tight enough to hold without tearing. The second stitch she did alone, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. The third was easier. By the fourth, her hands were steady, her movements sure. "Good hand," Hototo said quietly when she tied off the last stitch. "You learn fast." "Had a good teacher," Rose said, trying for lightness, but her voice came out shaky. Now that the crisis was past, reaction was setting in. Her hands started to tremble again, and she had to set down the needle before she dropped it. Hototo reached out and covered her hands with his own, stilling the trembling. "You did well tonight. Better than well. You didn't panic, didn't freeze. You fought." "I was terrified," Rose admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you alive. It's panic that kills." He squeezed her hands gently, then released them. "We need to check the fence, see what we're dealing with." Outside, dawn was beginning to gray the eastern sky. They walked the fence line together, and with every step, Rose's heart sank lower. The wire had been cut clean through in 3 places, the posts pulled out and thrown aside. The damage was extensive, calculated to take days to repair, days Rose didn't have. But that wasn't the worst of it. Caught on a splintered board fluttering in the pre-dawn breeze was a single page from a ledger. Rose pulled it free and held it up to the growing light. The Blackwater Falls Cattle Company seal was stamped at the top, and below that, a handwritten schedule listing Thunder Creek Spring as acquired property, with detailed instructions for nightly stock runs until cleared. U.S. Marshal Whitaker sealed the torn ledger page and the ink-stained pouch in front of 2 witnesses, signed the flap, and placed both items into the iron strongbox for delivery to the circuit judge at Evanston. Evidence. Proof of intent dated and signed. Rose folded the page carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket, her hands steady now despite the exhaustion and fear. "We take this to Granite Pass today. Show the judge. This proves everything." Hototo's expression was grim but determined. "They'll be watching the roads. Then we ride careful." Rose met his eyes, seeing her own resolve reflected there. "We have proof now. Real proof. We can't let it go to waste." "All right." Hototo nodded slowly. "We leave within the hour. Ride hard, stay alert. If they try to stop us." "We don't stop," Rose finished. "We get this to the judge no matter what." They prepared quickly, loading rifles, filling canteens, saddling horses. Rose changed into riding clothes, practical trousers, and a sturdy shirt that had belonged to her grandmother. Hototo checked his ammunition twice, his movements methodical, and Rose felt a cold certainty settle over her. Today would bring violence, today would bring blood, but today might also bring justice. As the sun cleared the horizon, painting the prairie gold and rose, they mounted up. Wakeful Walt whined, sensing their tension, and Rose knelt to scratch his ears. "Stay here, boy. Guard the place. We'll be back before dark." The dog sat tail sweeping the dust, his eyes tracking them as they rode out. Rose looked back once, seeing the ranch, her home, her inheritance, her battleground, silhouetted against the rising sun. Then she turned forward and kicked her horse into a steady lope. Granite Pass was 20 miles east, a hard morning's ride. The trail wound through broken country gullies and dry washes, stands of cottonwood, along seasonal creeks, rocky outcrops that cast long shadows in the morning light. Good country for an ambush. They'd ridden perhaps 8 miles when Hototo raised his hand, signaling a halt. Rose reined in beside him, her hand moving instinctively to the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "What is it?" "Riders. Hototo's voice was barely a whisper. Ahead in the trees, 3, maybe 4. Rose strained her eyes, but saw nothing except shadow and sun-dappled leaves. How can you tell? Birds stopped singing. Hototo pointed to a stand of cottonwoods, perhaps 200 yards ahead, where the trail narrowed between high banks. Perfect place for an ambush. They're waiting for us to ride into range. Rose's mouth went dry. What do we do? We don't go where they expect us. Hototo turned his horse off the trail, heading north into rougher country. We circle around Comet Granite Pass from a different angle. It'll add time, but... A gunshot cracked and dirt exploded at her horse's hooves. The animal reared screaming, and Rose fought to keep her seat. More shots, 3, 4, 5, kicking up dust all around them. From the cottonwoods, riders burst forth, spurring hard. Boyle in the lead, his face a mask of fury. Behind him, 3 more men, rifles raised. Ride! Hototo shouted and slapped Rose's horse on the rump. The animal bolted, terror lending its speed, and Rose leaned low over its neck as bullets whined past. Hototo was beside her, his paint-matching stride for stride, and together they raced across the broken ground, with death snapping at their heels. Behind them, Boyle's voice roared orders. Cut them off. Don't let them reach the pass. The chase became a nightmare blur of pounding hooves and gunfire, of ducking low branches and leaping dry washes. Rose's horse stumbled once, nearly going down, and Hototo grabbed her reins, keeping the animal upright by sheer force. They plunged into a narrow ravine, walls rising on either side, and for a moment the gunfire stopped and the pursuers couldn't get a clear shot. But the ravine was a trap. It dead-ended against a rock face, perhaps 12 feet high, water-carved and smooth. No way forward, no way out except back through Boyle's men. Rose wheeled her horse, breathing hard, and saw the riders blocking the ravine mouth. 4 of them, rifles leveled, confident grins on their faces. Boyle in front, his sorrel, stamping, his eyes gleaming with triumph. End of the line, Miss McKenna, Boyle called. You and your Indian friend have been a considerable nuisance. Time to put an end to that. Hototo's hand moved to his rifle, but Rose could see the calculation in his eyes, 4 against 2 caught in a dead end with no cover. They'd be cut down before they got off more than a couple shots. What do you want? Rose called, stalling for time, for ideas, for anything. That paper you found, Boyle said. The ledger page. Hand it over and maybe we let you ride out of here. Maybe. Rose's hand moved to her pocket, feeling the folded document. Their only proof. Their only hope. Hototo leaned close, his voice barely a breath. The rock face. Can you climb it? Rose glanced back. 12 feet of smooth stone, no handholds she could see. But at the top, sage and scrub pine, and beyond that, open country. If they could get up, I can try, she whispered. Then try now. I'll cover you. But now Rose, Hototo, spurred his horse forward, firing his rifle, one-handed the shots, forcing Boyle's men to duck and scatter. In the chaos, Rose threw herself from her saddle and ran for the rock face. Her fingers scrabbled at stone, finding a tiny crack, a knob of rock, pulling herself up, inch by desperate inch. Behind her, gunfire erupted. Hototo's rifle, cracking methodically, returned fire from Boyle's men, filling the ravine with thunder. Rose didn't look back, didn't think, just climbed. Her fingernails tore her arms, screamed, but she kept moving. 6 feet, 8, 10. A bullet chipped rock beside her head, spraying her face with stinging fragments. She cried out, but didn't let go. 12 feet. Her hand found sage root at the top, and she hauled herself over the edge, collapsing on solid ground. Below, Hototo's rifle clicked empty. Rose saw him throw it aside and draw his Colt, but Boyle was charging his own pistol raised. The shot echoed like cannon fire. Hototo's horse went down screaming, throwing him hard against the ravine wall. He hit with sickening force and crumpled. "No!" Rose screamed. Boyle dismounted, walking toward Hototo's fallen form with deliberate slowness. "Should have kept riding, Indian. Should have minded your own business." Rose fumbled for the rifle on her back, brought it up sighted down the barrel. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it steady. Boyle was 40 feet below her, almost directly beneath. A difficult shot even for an experienced marksman. For Rose, who'd fired maybe 20 rounds in her entire life. She pulled the trigger. The sharps bucked against her shoulder, the report deafening. Below, Boyle's hat flew off the bullet, passing inches from his skull. He dove for cover, shouting orders, and his men scattered, looking for the source of fire. Rose worked the lever, chambering another round, and fired again. This time she aimed for the rocks near Boyle's feet, driving him back. The third shot shattered against the ravine wall, sending Boyle's men scrambling for their horses. "She's up top," one of them shouted. "We're sitting ducks down here." Boyle cursed, mounting his sorrel. "This ain't over," he roared up at Rose. "You hear me? This ain't over." Then they were riding away, disappearing down the ravine in a cloud of dust, leaving only echoes and the smell of gunpowder. Rose dropped the rifle and half climbed, half fell down the rock face, her hands bleeding, her breath coming in sobs. She reached Hototo and rolled him over, terrified she'd find him dead. He groaned a sound that was the most beautiful thing she'd ever heard. His eyes opened unfocused, and a trickle of blood ran from his temple where he'd struck the rock. "Rose, I'm here." She cradled his head in her lap, checking for other wounds. His ribs were bruised. She could feel them through his shirt, and his left arm hung at an odd angle. Dislocated shoulder, maybe, or broken collarbone. But he was alive. "You shot at them." Hototo set a ghost of a smile on his lips. "Scared them off. I missed." Rose said, tears streaming down her face, now that the terror was releasing its grip. "You didn't miss." Hototo's good hand found hers squeezed weakly. "You saved us both. That's all that matters." Rose looked around the ravine. Hototo's paint lay dead, shot through the chest. Her own horse had bolted during the gunfight, was probably halfway back to Thunder Creek by now. They were on foot miles from anywhere with Boyle and his men, likely regrouping for another try. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Give me a minute." Hototo sat up slowly, his face going white with pain. Rose helped him stand, taking most of his weight, and together they staggered toward the ravine mouth. Each step was agony for him, from his injuries for her, from the strain of supporting a man who outweighed her by 70 pounds. But they kept moving because stopping meant dying. They'd made it perhaps a quarter mile when they heard hoofbeats. Rose's heart sank, Boyle coming back to finish them. She looked around desperately for cover for anything. But the rider who appeared around the bend wasn't Boyle. It was Dr. Yale driving his buckboard at a reckless pace, his medical bag bouncing on the seat beside him. He hauled back on the reins, the wagon skidding to a halt, and stared at them with wide eyes. "By thunder," he breathed. "I heard shots. Thought I'd find bodies." "Not yet," Rose said, her voice cracking. "But Hototo's hurt bad. We need to get him to Granite Pass to the judge." "No." Dr. Yale's face was grim. "Not Granite Pass. Judge Holloway's in Fitzgerald's pocket, bought and paid for. If you go there with that evidence, they'll arrest you for disturbing the peace and lose that paper before sunset. I've seen it happen before." Rose felt the last of her hope crumble. "Then what do we do?" "We go back to Thunder Creek," Dr. Yale said. "Patch him up, figure out our next move. But first..." He climbed down from the wagon and began examining Hototo with practiced hands. Dislocated shoulder, cracked ribs, concussion. Nothing life-threatening if we're careful. Help me get him in the wagon. Together, they lifted Hototo into the wagon bed, Rose cushioning his head with her folded coat. Dr. Yale snapped the reins, turning the buckboard around, and they headed back west, away from Granite Pass, and whatever justice might have waited there. I sent a wire last night, Dr. Yale said as they rode, to an old friend, Colonel Mackenzie, stationed at Fort Bridger. He's no friend of land thieves and cattle barons. If anyone can bring the U.S. Marshal down here, it's him. But it'll take time. Maybe a week, maybe 2. We don't have 2 weeks, Rose said. Boyle knows we have evidence. He'll come for us. Then we'll be ready. Dr. Yale's jaw was set. I'm done hiding, Rose. Done being afraid. Your grandmother saved my daughter. The least I can do is stand with her granddaughter. Rose looked at the old doctor, seeing him truly for the first time, not just a town physician, but a man with his own wounds, his own battles, his own reasons to fight. Thank you, she whispered. Thank me when we're all still alive to tell the tale, Dr. Yale said. But his hand reached over and squeezed hers briefly, and Rose felt less alone than she had since Grandma Abigail died. They reached Thunder Creek as the sun was setting, painting the prairie blood red. Wakeful Walt barked joyously at their return, circling the wagon, licking Rose's hands when she climbed down. The ranch looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable, and Rose could see it with new eyes, not just a home, but a fortress that would have to withstand siege. They carried Hototo inside Dr. Yale, setting his shoulder with a practiced wrench that made Hototo grunt, but didn't wake him fully. The concussion had him drifting in and out of consciousness. Rose helped the doctor bind Hototo's ribs, clean the gash on his temple, check him for internal injuries. He'll live, Dr. Yale said finally, but he needs rest, a few days at least. We might not have a few days, Rose said. Then we make do with what we have. Dr. Yale straightened, wincing, as his own back protested. Now about defenses. Do you have ammunition? Some. Water? The spring. Good. Dr. Yale moved to the window, studying the approach to the ranch. If they come, they'll come in force. Too many for 2 people, even 2 armed people to hold off indefinitely. We need help. As if summoned by his words, another wagon appeared on the road. Rose grabbed her rifle, but Dr. Yale put a hand on her arm. Wait, I know that rig. The wagon pulled into the yard, and a woman climbed down, tall, stern-faced, with gray-streaked hair, pulled back in a severe bun. Rose recognized her Mabel Lizette, the schoolteacher from Short Grass. Behind her wagon came another, driven by a young man with frightened eyes and a pregnant wife beside him. Eric and Carolina Aldrich. We heard what happened, Mabel said without preamble. The whole town's talking about Boyle's men chasing you into the Badlands. Some are saying you're dead. Some are saying you killed half of Boyle's crew. She smiled grimly. I'm glad to see the truth is somewhere in between. What are you doing here? Rose asked. What does it look like we're here to help? Mabel gestured to the wagon bed, which was loaded with supplies, food, ammunition, medical supplies, even a few spare rifles. If Fitzgerald wants this ranch, he'll have to go through all of us. Eric climbed down his hands, shaking slightly. I know I'm not much use in a fight, he said. But I can shoot straight enough, and I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of letting men like Fitzgerald take what they want. If you'll have me, I'll stand with you. Rose felt tears sting her eyes. Why risk yourselves for me? Because your grandmother did the same for us, Mabel said quietly. Every family here, Abigail, helped us at one time or another. Alone when times were hard, medicine when children were sick, friendship when we were alone. We owe her, and we owe you. Besides, Eric added with a wry smile, if Fitzgerald takes your spring, he'll take all our water next. This fight is everyone's fight. You're just the first to make a stand. Dr. Yale nodded approvingly. Then we have our garrison. Rose, show them where to place the rifles. Eric, help me with the water barrels. We'll need reserves if they try to burn us out again. Mabel, your eyes are sharper than mine. Take the first watch. They worked through the night, transforming the ranch into something resembling a fortress. Barrels filled with water were positioned around the house and barn. Rifles were loaded and placed at every window. Spare ammunition was distributed. Provisions were stored where they could be reached quickly. And through it all, Hototo slept fitfully on Rose's bed, his breathing steady but his face pale. Rose sat with him when she had a moment, holding his hand, willing him to wake. You can't leave me now, she whispered. Not when I've just found you. Not when I've just started to believe we might win. As if hearing her, Hototo's eyes fluttered open. Rose, I'm here. She squeezed his hand. How do you feel? Like I was thrown from a horse and shot at. He managed a weak smile, which is accurate. Did we make it? We made it. And we have help now. Dr. Yale, Mabel, Eric, and his wife. They're all here. Hototo's eyes widened. Why? Because they're good people. And because Grandma helped them once. Rose felt her throat tighten. We're not alone anymore. We never were, Hototo said quietly. But it's good to have it confirmed. He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain from his ribs, and lay back down. How long until Fitzgerald comes? Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Dr. Yale sent for help, the U.S. Marshal, but he might not arrive for days. Then we hold. Hototo's good hand found hers again, gripped it with surprising strength. Whatever comes, Rose, we hold. And when the Marshal arrives, we make sure there's still something worth saving. Rose nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture of connection that felt more intimate than any words. Outside, Mabel's voice called softly, movement on the East Road. Multiple riders. Rose's head snapped up. She squeezed Hototo's hand once more, then grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. In the distance, she could see them, a line of riders silhouetted against the rising moon. Too many to count at this distance, but at least a dozen. Maybe more. And at their head, on his big sorrel, sat Boyle. Beside him, on a black stallion, rode a man Rose had never seen before. Tall, well-dressed, with silver in his hair and an air of command. Even at this distance, she knew who he was. Magnus Fitzgerald. The cattle baron had come to finish this himself. Dr. Yale appeared at her shoulder, his face grim. So, it begins. Rose checked her rifle, made sure the chamber was loaded, and took her position at the window. Around the house, she could hear the others doing the same. Mabel at the east window, Eric at the south, Carolina loading spare rifles, Dr. Yale moving between positions. The riders stopped just out of rifle range, a long line of men and horses, dark against the moonlit prairie. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Fitzgerald spurred forward alone, his black horse prancing, until he was perhaps 50 yards out. Miss McKenna. His voice was cultured, educated, completely at odds with the violence he represented. I believe we have matters to discuss. Rose moved to the door, keeping the rifle ready. Nothing to discuss. This is my land, and you're trespassing. Your land. Fitzgerald's laugh was genuinely amused. My dear girl, you don't seem to understand how the world works. This is all my land, every acre from here to Granite Pass. You're just squatting on a piece I haven't bothered to claim yet. I have deeds, legal water rights going back 30 years. Papers. Fitzgerald waved dismissively. Papers can be challenged. Surveys can be redone. Judges can be persuaded. The only thing that matters is power, Miss McKenna. I have it. You don't. Hototo appeared beside Rose, leaning heavily on the doorframe, his face pale but his eyes burning. You're wrong, he called out. The only thing that matters is what you're willing to die for. And we're willing to die for this land. Are you? Fitzgerald's eyes narrowed as he took in Hototo. For a long moment, the cattle baron was silent, studying the warrior, with an intensity that made Rose's skin crawl. Then his eyes widened slightly recognition, and something that might have been fear. I know you, Fitzgerald said slowly. The scout from the Sand Creek territories, the one who testified about the treaty violations. They said you disappeared. I was disappeared. Hototo said, his voice hard as granite. By men you hired. Men who burned my village, killed my family, stole our lands. I survived. And I've been looking for you ever since Magnus Fitzgerald. Or should I say, Magnus Fisher, which is what you called yourself back then. Rose's breath caught. Fisher. She'd heard that name before in Grandma Abigail's stories about the early days, a land speculator who cheated settlers and disappeared before he could be prosecuted. Could it be the same man? Fitzgerald's face went carefully blank. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Hototo took a step forward, ignoring the pain it must have caused. You stole my family's land with false papers and bought officials. You poisoned our livestock to drive us off. And when my father tried to testify, you had him killed, made it look like an accident. But I know the truth, and now everyone will know the truth. For a moment, Fitzgerald's mask slipped, and Rose saw the monster beneath cold, calculating without conscience or mercy. Then the mask returned, and he smiled. Quite a tale, he said. But the word of an Indian against a respectable businessman, no judge would believe it. And besides, he gestured to the line of men behind him. You won't live to testify. None of you will. He wheeled his horse and rode back to his men. Rose saw him giving orders, saw the men spreading out, circling the ranch. This wasn't going to be a quick raid like before. This was going to be a siege. Everyone to positions, Dr. Yale called. They're going to surround us, try to starve us out, or burn us out. Don't waste ammunition. Make every shot count. Rose helped Hototo back to the bed despite his protests. You need to rest. Let us handle this. I can still shoot, Hototo insisted. With what one good arm and cracked ribs, Rose pressed him down firmly. Rest now. Save your strength. We'll need you later when they try to rush us. She returned to her window, just as the first shots rang out, not aimed at the house, but at the water barrels outside. Wood-splintered water gushed out, forming dark puddles that soaked into the thirsty earth. Fitzgerald's men were cutting off their water supply. The spring, Rose shouted. They're going for the spring. Eric fired from his window, forcing back 3 men who'd been running toward the cottonwood planks. But more came from another angle, and Rose saw them tearing at the boards, trying to foul the water or redirect it away from the ranch. Mabel's rifle cracked twice in rapid succession, and 2 men fell. The others retreated, dragging their wounded, but Rose knew they'd try again. They had numbers, time, and resources. All the defenders had was desperation. The night dissolved into chaos, gunfire from the darkness, return fire from the windows, smoke and shouting, and the constant grinding fear that the next bullet would find flesh. Rose fired until her shoulder ached from the rifle's kick, until her ears rang, and her eyes stung from powder smoke. Beside her, Dr. Yale worked with mechanical efficiency, loading, and firing, his face set and grim. Sometime near midnight, Carolina cried out. Rose spun and saw blood spreading across the young woman's shoulder. "She's hit." Dr. Yale was there in an instant, examining the wound. "Grazed. She'll be fine. Bandage it tight and keep her head down." But the injury had an effect. Eric, seeing his pregnant wife wounded, let out a roar of rage and charged to the door. "I'll kill them. I'll kill every last one." Rose and Hototo, who dragged himself from the bed despite his injuries, grabbed Eric and hauled him back. "That's what they want," Hototo shouted over the gunfire. "They want you angry, want you reckless. Don't give them that." Eric fought for a moment, then collapsed, sobbing. "She's hurt. Carolina's hurt. She's alive," Rose said firmly. "Keep her that way. Stay at your window. Protect her." Eric nodded, wiping his eyes, and returned to his position. The defense held but barely. As dawn began to gray, the eastern sky, the gunfire slackened. Fitzgerald's men pulled back to regroup, leaving the ranch smoking and battered. Rose did a quick count. They'd fired perhaps 200 rounds. They had maybe 300 left, against a dozen men that wouldn't last another night. Dr. Yale came to stand beside her, his face drawn with exhaustion. "We can't hold much longer. If the marshal doesn't come soon, he'll come," Rose said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "He has to come." But as the morning wore on and no help arrived, Rose began to wonder if she'd been wrong. Maybe the wire hadn't gotten through. Maybe the marshal didn't care about one small ranch in the middle of nowhere. Maybe they were going to die here defending 60 acres of prairie that wouldn't matter to anyone but them. Hototo found her at noon, sitting on the floor beneath the window, too exhausted to stand. He lowered himself beside her, moving carefully, favoring his ribs, and took her hand. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "I'm glad I met you. Glad I stopped here. Glad I got to fight for something that mattered." Rose felt tears she'd been holding back finally overflow. "We're not going to make it, are we?" "I don't know." Hototo's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "But if we don't, I want you to know something. These past days fighting beside you, watching you refuse to break, you reminded me why life is worth living. Why it's worth fighting for. I thought I'd lost that when I lost my home. But you showed me it's not the place that matters. It's the people. It's what you stand for." Rose turned to him, saw the truth in his eyes, and felt something break open in her chest. All the fear and grief and loneliness she'd carried for so long, suddenly made bearable by this man's presence, this man's belief in her. "If we survive this," she said, "will you stay? Not just for a while. Stay. Make this your home too." Hototo smiled, and it was like sunrise. "Yes, I'll stay." They leaned toward each other, and Rose closed her eyes, feeling his breath on her lips. "Riders." Mabel's voice shattered the moment. Multiple riders from the east. Rose and Hototo scrambled to the window rifles, ready, expecting the final assault. But what she saw made her heart leap. A long column of riders, blue uniforms gleaming in the afternoon sun. At their head, a man carrying a flag and the stars and stripes snapping in the wind. And beside him, a figure in civilian clothes, but with a badge glinting on his chest. The U.S. Marshal had arrived. Fitzgerald's men saw them too. There was a moment of confusion, of milling horses and shouted orders. Then Boyle made his choice. He spurred his sorrel toward the approaching column, rifle raised, perhaps thinking he could scatter them with bold action. The marshal's escort didn't scatter. They formed a line, rifles leveled, and the marshal's voice carried clear across the prairie. Kensington Boyle, you are under arrest for assault, attempted murder, and land fraud. Throw down your weapons. Boyle's answer was to fire. His bullet went wide, harming no one. The return volley did not. Boyle toppled from his saddle, hit multiple times, and lay still in the dust. His men, seeing their foreman dead and a dozen soldiers facing them, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. Only Fitzgerald remained mounted, his black stallion prancing nervously. He looked at the soldiers, at his captured men at the ranch, where Rose and the others were emerging cautiously from cover. Then he looked at Hototo, standing in the doorway despite his injuries, and something like resignation crossed his face. "You win," he said simply. "This time you win." The marshal rode forward, flanked by 2 soldiers. "Magnus Fitzgerald, also known as Magnus Fisher, you are under arrest for fraud, murder, conspiracy, and about 15 other charges I'll think of on the ride back to Fort Bridger. If you're smart, you'll come peaceful." Fitzgerald dismounted, his movements slow and dignified. "I assume you have evidence." Testimony from 3 survivors of Sand Creek. Documents from the Territorial Land Office showing a pattern of fraud going back 20 years. A dying declaration from a doctor in Cheyenne who says you hired him to poison an old woman named Abigail McKenna. The marshal's smile was cold. "We have evidence, Mr. Fisher. More than enough to hang you twice over." Rose stepped forward, pulling the folded ledger page from her pocket. "And this. Proof he ordered his men to destroy my property and force me off my land." The marshal took the page, examined it, and nodded. "That'll do nicely. Thank you, miss." Soldiers moved in, shackling Fitzgerald's hands. The cattle baron looked at Rose one last time. "You're just one girl," he said almost plaintively. "How did you—" "I'm not just one girl," Rose said quietly. "I'm a McKenna, and we don't break." As the soldiers led Fitzgerald away, Rose felt Hototo's arm come around her shoulders. She leaned into him, letting herself finally feel the weight of everything they'd survived. Dr. Yale emerged from the house, bloodied but unbowed. "Well," he said, "that was considerably more excitement than I'm accustomed to." Mabel laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. "Speak for yourself, Franklin. I'm considering taking up target shooting as a hobby." Even Eric managed a tired smile as he helped Carolina out, her shoulder bandaged, but her eyes bright. "We did it," he said wonderingly. "We actually did it." The marshal dismounted and approached Rose, extending his hand. "You must be Rose McKenna. I'm Marshal Dawson. Got a wire from Colonel Mackenzie saying a young lady was in desperate need of assistance." Looks like he was right. Rose shook his hand. "Thank you for coming. We couldn't have held much longer." "You held long enough. That's all that matters." Marshal Dawson looked around at the bullet-scarred walls, the trampled garden, the smoke-stained barn. Place took a beating. "We'll rebuild," Rose said. "That's what McKennas do." The marshal smiled. "I believe you will. Now I'll need statements from all of you. And there'll be a trial probably in Cheyenne. You'll have to testify." "We'll be there," Hototo said. "All of us." Over the following days, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The soldiers camped nearby, providing protection, while Fitzgerald's men were rounded up and arrested. Dr. Yale tended to the wounded. There were many on both sides, though miraculously, no one from the ranch had died. Mabel returned to short grass to resume teaching, though she visited often. Eric and Carolina went home to their farm, but not before promising to help with the rebuilding. And Rose and Hototo began the work of putting Thunder Creek Ranch back together. It was hard work, replacing fence posts, replanting the garden, repairing the barn, restoring the spring box. But they did it together their movements falling into an easy rhythm, their conversations flowing naturally. Sometimes they worked in silence, comfortable with each other's presence. Sometimes they talked about the past, about the future, about the ranch, and how it might grow. One evening, perhaps 2 weeks after the siege, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. Wakeful Walt lay between them, content and drowsy. The ranch looked better now, still scarred, but healing just like they were. Marshall sent word. Rose said, "Trial's set for next month in Cheyenne. Fitzgerald will hang most likely." "Good," Hototo said simply. "Do you feel—" Rose hesitated, searching for words. "Do you feel like you got justice for your family?" Hototo was quiet for a long moment. "Justice doesn't bring them back, doesn't undo what was done. But yes, I feel like something was balanced, like their deaths meant something after all." Rose nodded, understanding. "Grandma would have liked you," she said. "Would have liked that you helped save her ranch. I didn't save it. We did. Together." "Together," Rose agreed. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Hototo, about what you said during the siege, about staying. I meant it." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. "If you'll have me, I'll stay. Not as hired help, as a partner," Rose finished. "Equal shares, equal say. This can be our ranch, our home." Hototo smiled, and it transformed his face. "Our home," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." Rose felt her heart swell with something too big to name, love maybe, or hope, or just the profound relief of not being alone anymore. She leaned toward him, and this time nothing interrupted. Their lips met gentle and sure, a promise sealed with a kiss. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should make it official," Rose said. "Talk to the land office, add your name to the deed." "Are you sure your grandmother would have wanted you here? Would have wanted the ranch to go to someone who'd fight for it like you did?" Rose squeezed his hand. "I'm sure." Hototo raised her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "Then yes. Thank you." They sat together as the stars came out, one by one, bright and eternal against the darkening sky. The spring sang its quiet song, and the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and the prairie stretched away in all directions, endless, beautiful, and finally, truly theirs. In the distance, wakeful Walt raised his head and barked once, not an alarm, just acknowledgement. Someone was coming. But Rose wasn't afraid anymore. She'd learned that when you stood firm, when you fought for what mattered, when you found people worth standing with, you could survive anything. She'd learned that home wasn't just land or water or buildings. It was people. It was belonging. It was worth fighting for. And she'd learned that sometimes the greatest strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together. The ranch would thrive. The spring would flow. And Rose McKenna, no longer alone, no longer afraid, would build a life worth living on the land her grandmother had loved, together with a wandering warrior who'd finally found his way home.